Welcome to Yada Yada Yiddish, where we explore Jewish lessons we learn from episodes of Seinfeld. Today, we're going to focus on the parking garage episode, Season 3, Episode 6. In this episode, the entire cast is lost in a parking garage. Kramer buys this massive air conditioner, and they are walking out to the car, and they can't find it. And I think it's quite brilliant that they managed to shoot an entire episode in the parking garage. But comedy ensues as they are trying to find the way to the car. They split up, they find each other again. It's quite a memorable episode. What it reminded me of the most, what it really reminded me of, which is why I think I find it so funny, is when I was a child, my grandmother took me and my sister to the circus. She took us every year to the circus, but one year was more memorable than the others because when the circus was over, we went out to the parking lot to get to the car and we couldn't find it. And this was before the days that we can summon the car. And it was even before the days that there was like a electric fob. So you couldn't even the car. I don't think my kids even know that there was a time that existed, but all we had was the key. So if you didn't know where the car was, there was no finding it. And I was probably 5 or 6 at the time. So it seemed to me at the time like hours. It was probably 10 minutes, but at least the way I remember the story is we spent hours just going up and down the roads looking for the cars until finally a security golf cart or something came by and drove us around the parking lot until we finally found the car. And that was very memorable. And as I'm watching this episode of Seinfeld, that's exactly what's going through my mind. But on a deeper level, because that's really what this podcast is all about, it was reminiscent of an analogy that the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, gives for life. He paints the picture of a person who is lost in this labyrinth, this maze of hedges, trying to find his way out. And the goal is to get to the middle of the maze where there's a tower. And from within the maze, it's kind of like if you've ever been to one of those cornfield mazes, we did those years ago with our kids. I would not recommend it. In any event, it's like one of those corn mazes or the hedge mazes where when you're in it, you can't see anything but the hedges in front of you and you keep on going. And just like in this Seinfeld episode, as they're trying to find their way, they keep on seeing clues. Like, for example, they're like, oh, look, there's the elevator. I remember the elevator.
I remember the elevator. There's elevators all over. Everything looks the same.
And then they're like, well, we don't even know if we're on the right level. And there's elevators all over the place. So you can't use the elevator, you can't use the sign. All you see, everything looks identical, everything looks the same. There's no way to really tell where they're going or how to find it. And he says, if you're in the maze, there's really no way to find your way out. There's trial and error. You can go down one path until it leads to a dead end. And often the paths are taking you even further away from your intended destination. Not only are they not getting you to where you want to go, they're taking you even further away. And then you get to the dead end. And then you have to backtrack and figure it out. And he explains that if you're in that maze, either you can go by trial and error and try to figure it out yourself, or you can find someone who's been through the maze before you. And if someone's already been through the maze, they can tell you which way to go. They can direct you. They can help you figure it out because they've seen it before. Just like if you were already in the tower and you had the vantage point where you can see the entire maze, you can see exactly where the person's going, and you can direct the person in the maze as to where to go. Left, right, straight. So those who have been through the maze before, like the person on the tower, they have the vantage point because they know which way to go. And the same is true in our lives. When we're struggling with things, and really, life is like being lost in a parking garage. You don't know where to go. You don't know how to find your way out. And it would be nice when you're stuck in that maze, like in the example of Ramchal, to have somebody guiding you, somebody telling you which way to go. And that's one way to do it. Find somebody who's been through the maze before who can tell you and guide you as to where to go and how to do it. But even better yet would be to talk to the person who made the maze. If you can find the person who made the maze, then they know the maze better than anyone else, even better than someone who's been through it before. The same thing is true in our lives. As we go through this maze of life, and we're not sure what to do, we can look to those who were there before. We can look to our parents, our grandparents, look to the previous generation. Often we believe that we know better than those who came before us. What do they know? When the truth is, instead of making our own mistakes, we can learn from the mistakes of the previous generation. I constantly try to encourage my children to do things based on the mistakes that I've made. And they look at me puzzled, as if like I'm this crazy person. And I try to explain to them, I've already made that mistake before. Why make the mistake when you can learn from my mistakes? Now, sometimes we just have to learn from our own mistakes. But if we can learn from the mistakes of others, if we can be open to learning from those who came before us, how much better off would we be? But then we have an even better plan. An even better course of action would be to go directly to the source, to go to the maker of the maze. Let's get back to our episode. As the characters are trying to make their way out, and they keep on coming up to dead ends. They keep on thinking they found the car, but they didn't really. Elaine yells out in frustration, "We need a system!" And that is where the maker of the maze comes in. How nice would it be if we had an instruction manual for life? If we had a guide that would help us find our way out? How great would it be if we had a system? The good news is, we do have that system. That instruction manual is what we call the Torah. In fact, the word Torah literally means instructions. And when we refer to the Torah as Torat Chaim, the literal translation of that expression is instructions for living. That's the point of the Torah. The Torah is not just this book of rules. It's not a history book either. What the Torah is an instruction manual for life. It's God's way of saying, I'm the manufacturer, and I am telling you how to get the most out of your life. If you want to know how to get the most out of your life, this is the instruction manual from the manufacturer himself. So there's definitely the overall theme of the episode of being lost, of not knowing where to go, and this idea of navigating through the difficulties of life without a guide, without a plan of how to get out is really challenging. And how if we would turn to our sages, turn to our parents, turn to those who are more knowledgeable than we are because they've been there and done that. Or better yet, if we turn to the Torah, to God's instruction manual as the manufacturer of the maze, we can find our way out, we can get the most out of our lives. But there's a line, really an exchange between Kramer and George that I want to focus on for the rest of our episode, because it touches on something that's so important and so deep. George expresses frustration of not being able to find the car. And just to add to the frustration and the stress that he's feeling is he's late. He has to get to meet his parents, I think like by 6:15. It's already close to that time. They haven't found the car yet. And now everybody is starting to separate. And even if they find the car, they're not going to be able to find each other. And he's feeling all of this stress and all of this frustration. And he mutters in the way that only George can.
What's the difference? We'll all be dead eventually.
And Kramer says to George, well, does that bother you?
Yeah, it bothers me. Doesn't it bother you?
Not at all.
You see, now that bothers me even more than dying bothers me, because it's people like you who live to be 120 because you're not bothered by it.
And they go back and forth for a little bit until Kramer says,
Well, I once saw this thing on TV with people who are terminally ill. Every one of them believed that the secret of life is just to live every moment.
And the truth is, when you look at these two expressions, one from George, on one hand, we're all going to die anyway, so what difference does it make? And Kramer's advice to live in the present and be in the moment, they're both right, and they're both two different perspectives, two different ways in which we look at the world and we look at life. The Torah tells us, going back to our instruction manual, the verse that talks about the idea of free will says, I place before you life and death, blessing and curse, choose life. And it's a very strange verse. First of all, If the Torah is telling us about free will, shouldn't the verse say, I place before you good and bad, choose good? Why life and death? It sounds so dramatic, almost as if every single decision we have in our lives is a matter of life and death. I mean, a little bit too much drama, right? Not every decision we make is a decision of life and death. And also, who wouldn't choose life? Don't we all choose life? Well, what the Torah is telling us is that George is actually quite right. Every moment that I'm on earth, every moment I'm here, I'm one step closer to being dead. In the 4 seconds that just elapsed, I'm 4 seconds closer to being dead. So every moment of life is actually a moment of dying. We are all actively dying right now, unless we make a choice. And that's where the Torah's verse, L'vacharta v'chaim, to choose life, comes in. What the Torah is telling us is that every moment of life, I can make a choice. I can choose to exist, which is a nice, fancy way of saying dying. Or I can choose to live. That's the choice I have. Do I want to settle for existence, or do I want to choose life? If I choose existence, I'm choosing death. Every decision we make, every single decision is a decision of life and death. A decision of whether I want to live meaningfully, whether I want to make a choice that will bring me closer to the person I'm meant to be, or whether I'm choosing just to kill some time. Choosing just to exist, in which case, I'm dying. That's not to say that relaxing isn't important. It's not to say that we shouldn't have downtime. But I could be sitting on a hammock, drinking a beer, relaxing so that I can be more productive afterwards. And then even the relaxing is a productive activity. I could be doing the same thing mindlessly, and then it's just existence. Then it's merely death. What the Torah is teaching us is the advice that Kramer gives to George. Live in the present, live in the moment, because when I do, then I can truly live. Then I can focus on what's truly important. When the Jewish people are at Sinai, getting ready to receive the Torah, the verse describes them as being tachte sahar, under the mountain. Many translators just explain what it means is that they were at the foot of the mountain, like in a poetic way. But the Talmud takes a more literal approach. It says they were under the mountain because God lifted the mountain over their heads and said, if you accept the Torah, great. If not, sham tiyeh kfuraschem, there will be your burial place. Now, aside from the fact that this whole exchange is really strange, after all, the Jewish people already agreed to accept the Torah. They already said they were going to do it. In fact, we said, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and only them will understand it. They accepted the Torah unconditionally. So why is God threatening them? Can you imagine showing up to a business deal after all the terms have already been agreed upon? Documents are ready to be signed, and all of a sudden, the person pulls out a gun and says, if you don't sign, I'm going to shoot you. You're like, whoa, buddy, I already agreed to the terms. I already agreed to sign. So why is the Almighty threatening them? That's a great question. But first, I want to focus on the terminology the Talmud uses. Why does it say, sham tiyeh kfuraschem? There will be your burial place. If you recall from the dreidel, there's a distinction between the dreidel we use in America and the dreidel they use in Israel. In America, the dreidel reads Nun, Gimel, Shin, and Hey, which stands for Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle happened there. That's what our dreidels say here in America, because it didn't happen here, it happened there in Israel. But if you were to go to Israel and buy a dreidel, instead of saying Nes Gadol Haya Sham with a shin, it has a pei. Nes Gadol Haya Ho. A great miracle happened here. So when the Talmud is explaining this idea that God held the mountain over their heads and said, if you accept the Torah, great. If not, where will be your burial place? It should have said, here will be your burial place. Why? Sham tiyeh kfuraschem, there will be your burial place. Rav Chaim Shmuel Lenitz, of blessed memory, explained that when God threatened the Jewish people with the mountains, he wasn't threatening them. After all, they had already accepted the Torah. What he was explaining to them is, as long as you live in the Sham, as long as you live there, as long as you don't stay in the present, that will be your downfall for all time. That will be your burial place. Not to say that he was threatening the Jewish people, but rather, the Almighty was teaching us the most important lesson. We cannot live life in the there. We cannot live life in the Sham. We must be present. Yes, we learn from the past. We plan for the future, but we live in the present. And if we fail to live in the present, then we're not living at all. We as a generation have lost the ability to savor things, to be mindful, to be present, because we're so busy, we're so caught up, we're so distracted by so many things around us. When the sewing machine was invented, the way it was marketed was, now that you have a sewing machine, what will you do with all your free time? Can you imagine that? Now that you don't have to sew your clothing with a needle and thread, what would you do with all your free time? But the truth is, all of our technological advances that promised to bring us so much ease and to give us so much time, where's that gotten us? We are living in the most technologically advanced time in all of world history, and yet the biggest complaint we all have is we just don't have any time.
I don't have time.
We're so busy, we're so bombarded with everything. We live in a time when we're always connected, where we never have any downtime. We never have any time to process and focus. We live in a time where we're constantly being pulled by what is urgent instead of what's important. How often are we having a conversation with somebody and we take out our phones and we stick them on the table? Hopefully we put it upside down instead of right side up, but that's not any better. When we stick our phone on the table, what we're saying to the person who we're talking to is, I'm having a conversation with you and you're important, but you're not that important. If a notification comes up, if the phone buzzes or rings, then 1 second. Whatever this is more important. I don't know about you, but it makes me feel like that phone is more important than I am. But the truth is, it's not important. It's just urgent. We get in the habit of focusing our attention on urgency instead of importance. We have become slaves to these devices. When it rings or dings, we have this urge to pick it up, and it's almost impossible to ignore it. And even if I'm with somebody and I hear their phone ring or ding and they say, oh, don't worry about it, I'll insist that they check it, because if they don't, they're going to be even more distracted than the distraction that's going to be caused by picking it up. Because in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, who was that? And what do they want? And how? How about just being present? Just being here. Just being in the moment. You go to a play and you're watching your children on stage, but instead of seeing them with your eyes, instead of conveying to them how proud of them you are and seeing them in the moment, we watch it through this tiny little screen. And as great as the camera of my phone is, it's not as good as the camera that God gave me. It's not as good as the eyes on my face. Why not just be present? Why not just enjoy the moment without having to share it and comment? Now, I'm not saying to do away with them. I'm not delusional. I know that this video that I'm recording right now is hopefully going to be on YouTube. You may even see some of these clips on Instagram, on social media. This podcast is heard on technology. I'm not saying to do away with all of it. These are wonderful tools that we can use to be more inspired, to be more elevated, to become better people. The problem is when we become enslaved to them. When the device is in control of me and I'm not in control of it, that is when we have a problem. Judaism has given us a gift, and that gift is called Shabbat. Shabbat, otherwise known as Shabbos, is the pause that refreshes. It's the island of time in the middle of our week where we get to experience a taste of the world to come. Jewish wisdom teaches us that on Shabbat, we feel a sense of what's called tachlis, of purpose, of having arrived. We get to experience what it means to be present, to be in the moment, without all the distractions of my life. I get to leave all the distractions behind and just be present For 25 hours, I get to experience the things in my life that are truly important, that are truly valuable. I get to sit down to a table with my family, with my wife and my children, where we can have conversations and we know that nobody's going to be distracted by their phones, their devices, because the devices are all away. I implore you, I encourage you, whether you're Jewish or not, whether you keep Shabbat or not, at the very least, have dinner together as a family that once a week, where all the devices are not just turned on to silent, they're not just put in your pockets, not even turned off. They're nowhere to be seen, locked away, if only to reinforce for yourself that you control the devices don't control you. And when we do that, we get to experience a real life. We get to experience what it means to live in the present. This week, why not take the gift of Shabbat for what it is? Sometimes in life, we need to disconnect in order to connect. Every single week, we have that opportunity. Every single week, we have the opportunity to dive into this island in time, to feel this expansive pause where I get to live life in the present. I get to live the moment for what it is right here and right now. And with that disconnection, I can find the ultimate connection. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to hear your comments, questions, comments, rebuttals. If there's an episode you want us to tackle, please share it with us. You can reach me at yada@learfield.com. That's YADA@LEHRFIELD. We'll leave it there and see you next time. Thanks. Have a great day.